host for the next 35-40 minutes, talking about the role of SDET. And before we go into the actual talk for Peter, what's your password?
It's whatever you want it to be.
Okay, taken. Thank you. I'll let you know what that means later down the line. So Peter, all yours.
Thank you, guys. So really, the reason I'm talking about the evolving role of an SDET is because I've been an SDET for a few years in different organizations, and the role has been quite different in every organization. And it got me thinking, what's the future for this kind of position? And an SDET is a software development engineering test. And it's really partly is to help me understand what it means, because I feel like there's two dimensions to the SDET role, which we'll come on to, right? There's the testing side and the software engineering side. And I think that brings a lot of challenges. And I'm not here to show a lot of data and to preach. I'm really here at the end to open up some discussion to hear what you guys think as well about the SDET role and what so kind of to validate some ideas and some industry sort of trends I've been seeing recently. So a little bit about me. So I'm an SDET. I've been in testing for 12 years, currently in Cambridge. Hope London's as sunny as Cambridge is. And so I used to work for organizations such as Google and Arm, which is here in Cambridge. And I've also liked doing a lot of work in web accessibility, purely as like an interest, really. And also, if you've got time, there's also a podcast I've started back in February called Tech and Test, and it's an interesting podcast. If you want to come on and talk about testing, please do come on. Right. Okay. So here's some of the agenda I'm trying to cover today. I'm not sure it's strictly in this form, but what is the SDET role? Where did it come from? What's the history behind it? And really, what's the kind of evolvingness? What's happening in the industry? What sort of trends and challenges of the SDET role as well? So what do SDETs do? And I've looked at organizations which hire SDETs, and one of them is Amazon. So Amazon you've kind of put this together, and it's kind of leading the implementation and design of test automation frameworks. And there's a lot of like frameworks and software engineering and making sure tools are built. So it seems quite a diverse role, and to be honest, there's no correct answer. Every organization I've worked at, the SDET role has been quite different. Some of them have been in different organization structure. So that meant doing more end-to-end testing. And in other organizations, it meant being more implemented and integrated with development and helping write unit tests. So this seems like a sensible set of points, guiding best practice, helping with continuous development, influencing architecture to make sure it's testable. So that all kind of makes sense. But let's look at the history, right? So this is a sort of interesting conference where we look at history as well. So the test engineers roles, which people are quite familiar with, they've been around for many decades, and these started out, as soon as software was starting to be written, especially in the 80s and 90s, a lot of test engineering QA kind of roles started to appear. But the SDET role really started to show its face when in the early 2000s, really, when we started to adopt automation into testing. And partly two reasons for that, because automation became more feasible and it also became more necessary. So the SDET role was first coined by Microsoft in those early 2000s. And since then, it started to be adopted by the tech industry at large. So a lot of companies started to advertise SDET roles and hire that kind of talent to solve test automation problems. And so even companies like Apple and Amazon, they started to quickly adopt it. And Google also finally took over the role of software engineering test. So later this role became software engineer tools and infrastructure, SETI. But actually, something happened. In 2014, Microsoft laid off a whole bunch of engineers. And a lot of those engineers were actually SDETs. And Google also started to retire the software engineer role, software engineer test role, and SETI as well. They just became software engineers. And currently today, I think Apple and Amazon still use SDET roles, but we can see a lot of big tech companies have started to transition away from using SDET roles. Why is that? It got me thinking, these weren't the slides I was hoping to write. I was hoping to lay down a full journey and path of the SDET role, but actually some of this information started to make me think and surprise me and question, why do we need the SDET role and what value does it bring to an organization? So I looked for an example, and this example is quite old, but it is an example that's documented by Microsoft, where they hired a lot of SDETs, and then they had a lot of end-to-end integration tests. And these integration tests had a high percentage of, they took a long time to run. And the changes that they're actually testing were really small, minute cosmetic changes. So these tests became very fragile. And there were, obviously bad coding practices with like hard-coded sleeps to try stabilizing the tests. And in the end, it took the team nearly a day to like do a full, regression test. And there's a lot of like days and weeks also spent to actually find product breakages that cause the tests to fail. So a lot of hours and time was spent in this kind of organization. But then they decided to really combine. So once they laid off a bunch of these SDETs, they then combined dev and test organizations and consolidated them into one engineering organization. And they removed this distinction between someone who codes and someone who tests. So everyone does some coding and everyone does some testing. And everyone's really accountable for their own work. So you can kind of think of this as like maybe like a T-shaped person. And the key thing here is they looked through the tens and thousands of tests they'd actually built over 8 years. And they started to look at what served them. Did these tests actually help them deliver and find issues and bugs quickly? So they started to really replace these old tests. So these are the tests written by testers and SDETs over 8 years. And we can kind of see the progression here. And so in 2015, they had a lot of end-to-end tests, a lot of flakiness, a lot of fragility, and spending a lot of time trying to triage and find issues. And this was before the merging of development and test organizations. So there were two separate orgs. And primarily the SDETs were writing the end-to-end tests. In 2017, the test engineers, they adopted and moved them into the engineering team. And they really started to write loads more unit tests and getting the testing pyramid kind of in shape. And we can see in this case, this is what the testing sort of looked like based on the data they provided in the blog. So there were some takeaways from this that got me thinking. It's not necessarily like the SDET role that's been quite important here because we didn't have SDET role in this particular example. The key things here were the unified engineering organization. So making sure those development and test teams were reporting to the same org and there's more collaboration. So that meant everyone was doing more of everything, more of testing and more of coding. Also, the replacing of outdated tests. So often I've worked on projects where there's been test cases which are maybe lived many years, and we don't always think about questioning if they still serve value right today. So sometimes we do need to look at what tests we're running, and that was quite key here to constantly look at the test strategy, look at the old existing tests, do they still serve us? And that's something that I sort of took away from that example. And there was a strong reliance originally on loads of fragile UI automation tests, which typically come when you're writing a lot of end-to-end kind of scenarios. And they also structured the test taxonomy really clearly. So they made very clear to everyone working on the team and project what the levels of testing were and what the expectations were and how many they plan to write of each. So I think that taxonomy also helped them have that common language to understand what level of test they were writing. So they improved the test reliability as well. They were rerunning the tests 24/7, like constantly running them to find flakiness and identify those tests and remove them and sandbox them out of the testing suite, which was good. So they kept a handle on failures. And the reduced time to analyze these tests also and accelerated bug detection. So that was something that all came out from really re-adopting testing lower down the levels, right, with integration tests and unit tests, so getting better resolution of testing there. And the key, they also looked at continuously reevaluating their testing process. So they didn't just do this once, it's a continuous thing that they kept doing. So with that in mind, I started to think, well, what are the challenges with SDET roles? So organizations which do have the SDET role, what are the sort of challenges? And these are the sort of things that I sort of thought about, which maybe apply to me when I've worked in these roles. So some of it is career, also career focused. So am I a software engineer or am I a QA lead or QA engineer, right? And I think having these two dimensions, there's always this sort of split with balancing the two and having to spend time with coding a framework up and developing frameworks to also thinking about organizational structure and strategy, which takes up a lot of time and workshops and doing a lot of QA-ness to make that happen. So there's sort of two threads there which kept coming up, which in one way excited me, but also caused a lot of challenges with time, priorities, and they're very different types of challenges as well. You've got very deep technical challenges with scalability and doing testing at scale versus changing a culture within the organization and how they think about testing. So very two different things, and they're all in the same role. So that's one challenge that came to me with the SDET role. This need to have expertise in these two very distinct domains. The other thing was the SDET roles I tended to work with end-to-end tests more frequently than being integrated in engineering. And that tended to mean a lot of flakiness potentially caused by networking and devices and a whole bunch of different uncontrollable things within the environment, the test environments. And there's always the sense of speed of development. So trying to enable the development team and engineering team to produce code quickly and give them the tools, but at the same time take a step back and work on that strategy. So these were some of the challenges I thought with the role. So it really got me thinking, do we still need a separate SDET role? Is this something that actually serves us as a tech community? And it's not something that I have an answer to, but it's got me thinking, is this actually adding any value given what Microsoft and Google have done with their kind of similar roles? I think one reason for this is that I've been thinking in this direction is because I think the landscape has changed a lot since the early 2000s when this SDET role first appeared. And we're starting to move with organizations shifting left. And shifting left in terms of testing is not anything new, but it doesn't mean all organizations have shifted left. There's still a lot of organizations out there which haven't. And as they start to do more and more of that shifting left, the ownership becomes quite important. So developers take more ownership of writing test cases. When that happens, it kind of, the SDET role plays a different parts in that sort of life cycle, because ultimately the software engineers who are writing the feature code are going to be the engineers that will be on call, maybe woken up at 3 a.m. if their code is not working. So giving them the responsibility of owning and deciding what test cases they want to write makes a lot of sense. The other thing is I've noticed is the test tooling and the test frameworks started to be done, by separate teams within organizations. So there's a tools team, for example, that maybe develop a framework. And if you look actually inside this tools team, a lot of the engineers in that team are not SDETs. They're actually software engineers who are very focused on building good software. And again, I think there's more of a focus now where those projects are going to teams of software engineers building these tools rather than an SDET role where someone who's trying to do that whilst balancing other priorities. And of course, there's been a lot of technological advancements recently with kind of large language models, large action models to kind of help. And because of that, it means the technology and the technical skills required to build these tools has gone up, has increased. We need to know more things than ever before. We need to know how to create a large scalable test framework, which can integrate with AI and also give us the results that we want. But at the same time, still keep our pulse and fingers on the test strategies. I think there's a lot of information, a lot of domains we need to know. And I think it's quite a lot for one role to be really good at everything. So I think because of those advancements, it's also causing more challenges. And fundamentally, I think the evolution of test automation responsibilities has shifted in these sort of two ways. And this is me thinking. So software engineers are going to be picking up more of the technical challenges with these integrations with AI and with ML. And with developers taking ownership of writing more of their own tests, that's kind of, we're giving them the tools to do that. And the role of the test engineer may still be around in the sense of we still need someone to focus on user-facing scenarios and to come up and make sure we've got a strategy that we're not missing anything, right? Or if we're thinking about accessibility testing, internationalization, we still need someone to be taking that user-focused view and making sure the experience for the user is still been satisfied. And that means maybe even doing some exploratory testing when we've got a first UI interface and the UI keeps changing, doesn't make a lot of sense to invest in automation. And of course, the thing here is I think test engineers should really start to be writing more code and helping to automate some of those test cases. So there's more of a focus on that as well, the technical skills required to be a test engineer, which may have not been the case a few years ago. So the opportunity is also here with AI and machine learning. So there's a lot of tools we can create and are starting to write. And the key thing here is with the testing processes we have in organizations, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of logging data, defects, and all this data is a treasure mine of finding out whether failures in the product area potentially, or any hotspots within the product we need to focus on. And we can also use some of this data to determine what kind of testing we need to do and where, and what levels of testing we have. So I think there's a big opportunity in testing to use this AI. And again, we need the skills to enable that to happen. And so in summary, I just wanted to start opening up some discussion really to get your thoughts, but I really think the SDET role is going to merge into more the software engineering role, and the test engineering role is still going to be there, but it's going to be more technical. And there's going to be more challenges with as we move into the AI and ML space. So I just wanted to pause here and really open up and get some comments or feedback on what my thoughts were.
I'd agree with that comment. I think the industry's been trying to merge, let's call it dev and QA forever. I think it's a good way forward, because then you get rid of, I'm a performance tester, I'm an automation framework engineer, whatever it is, I'm manual. You just need to be able to develop. Same as automation, what do you automate? You can automate anything. It's not software automation or test automation. It's much wider than that. I totally agree. As you said, there's a lot of organizations that are still just not mature enough, and it will take them time. Whether they catch up or not, I don't know. Whether they'll exist in 5 years' time, just be overtaken by the companies already doing the next big thing.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I've seen, some organizations which have definitely moved forwards and adopted this, and I do feel like they're ahead of the curve. When equally, I've worked for organizations which have these separate org structures, and there are these estate roles, and there are these kind of challenges. And I'm thinking, what does this mean really of like testing? Because it's so diverse, it's very organization specific. I think that's the challenge we have in testing, is it can be quite different everywhere we go, right? Just based on the philosophy and the organizational structure.
Yeah, I was talking to Jonathan over lunch, and if you think about, you've got the industry context, you've got the business within that industry, then you've got engineering, and then you've got software testing, all talking different languages, all different skills, some overlapping, intertwining, and specific for the industry as well. I think, that's one of the challenges we have to overcome.
I'm just looking at the chat. Someone's asked, any tips or positive experiences of integrating tests with AI? Yeah, it's a good question. So I've definitely seen some tooling that uses a chatbot which knows the internal testing framework, and you can ask it to, you can give it a feature file, a Gherkin feature file, and it will generate the BDD step implementations for that feature file. So there's definitely, these are sort of like tools I've seen used in-house in different companies. I don't think there's anything publicly out there that does that, but I don't think there's a lot of AI knowledge that's needed to kind of integrate some of these tools, and you just need someone who's got some knowledge in it to develop this. And I have seen some value in using those tools, but they don't always give you the perfect answer, right? You still need someone who's going to take that code and make it work. But it does give you something to start with so that you can kind of be a bit more productive, maybe, because you're not starting from a clean sheet of paper, right? You've got some of the code written for you, so you can just modify it and get it working. Are there any other sort of thoughts on anything? Someone's also put a comment here. We have heard today a few times that human testing is not going anywhere. There will always be a need for manual testers. Do you agree with this, or do you think future is automation and coding? So that's an interesting question. So I think like you can't automate everything, right? There's some type of testing you don't want to even automate, like usability testing, for example, right? And there are some problems that computers are just not good at solving. And I think it's kind of reducing the manual testing so that we can focus on those areas rather than trying to. The thing with manual testing, it's not scalable, right? So if you're trying to deliver releases at a high frequency and high cadence, you can't rely on constantly scaling your team to keep testing. That you do need automation. But it doesn't mean to say everything should be automated, right? We need to be very selective on which bits of the test strategy or plan we plan to do manually, and for what reason. What does doing it manually actually help, right? So accessibility testing, for example, I published a paper a few years ago on if you run loads of accessibility tools, like 5 of them, and you aggregate all of that data, you're still missing about 50% of the success criteria from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which means you can't just rely on tools. You still need someone with that knowledge and understanding to kind of fill in those gaps. So I think that's also something that's quite important, to realize the limitations of the automation we're using. Someone's put, if development team going to take ownership of automated tests, then QA role in this instance seems to be very less. How do you see it? Yeah, so I think when we talk about integrating with the engineering team, I'm not thinking of the engineering team writing every single test case. I think the engineering team have to be responsible for some of the testing, and usually that testing tends to be unit tests and integration tests, and possibly some end-to-end or critical user journeys. But I think it's a collaborative effort. I think it's not a case of the engineering team writing every single test, but in other words, as a QA function or as QA engineers, enabling the engineering team to have the tools, to have the process and the resources to enable testing, right? To make sure testing gets done. So it's not a case of who writes what tests, but it's a case of, do we have the right resources and structure in place to enable good quality, right? And to measure quality, so testers can get involved in OKRs, setting up metrics and understanding what does quality mean for our organization. And that's the bit which the engineering team possibly won't do. And that, from that, you could also write loads of tools and get loads of data and analyze and understand what quality is for that particular product.
Final question?
Yeah, is there a big enough pool of suitable candidates to do the SDET roles adequately? I remember speaking with a recruiter a while ago who was saying only about 5% of the CVs on his books were actually good at testing and writing code, and that that all the employers wanted that 5%.
Yeah, it's a good Very good question. I honestly don't have the data. Like, I know when I've spoken to recruiters, they've always told me that it's been hard to find SDET roles because I think because of the two distinct like skill sets that are involved, you get a lot of software engineers who are really good at API, back end development, and so I think that this just supports the need for kind of keeping test engineers and software engineers in those roles really doing a good job of what they're good at in one way.
Cool. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Peter, and see you next time when you're gonna hopefully give me the right password. Once in a lifetime.
Sure.
Yeah.
See you guys. Bye.
Good.